My daughter-in-law stood up at our own annual company meeting, in front of 61 employees, and announced that my position was being restructured effective immediately. She called it a layoff. She called it kind, even. She said the words, "We're so grateful for everything you built," while a man from HR slid a manila folder across the table toward me with a severance number circled in blue pen. I let her finish. I let the room clap, because some of them didn't know any better and some of them were too afraid not to. Then I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and asked her one question. "Whitney, before we adjourn, who authorized the printing of new share certificates?" She blinked at me the way you blink at a math problem you were told didn't apply to you anymore. Because in her plan, in her whole tidy little plan, there was exactly one detail she'd never bothered to check. I still owned 54% of the company she thought she'd just taken from me. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, where the woman they just fired is usually still holding the majority vote. Stay with me to the end. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 71 years old, and 30 years ago I built Voss Precision Fabricators out of a 2,000 square foot rental unit behind a muffler shop, with a used lathe I bought on a payment plan and a business card I designed myself on a library computer. My hands aren't soft. They've never been soft. There's a thin white scar across my left palm from a metal burr in year 4, back when I still ran the floor myself because I couldn't afford to hire someone who could. I know the smell of cutting oil the way other women know the smell of their own kitchens. I know the sound a machine makes right before it needs a new bearing, a half second before anyone else in the building hears it. I built this company for my son. Not in the sentimental way people say that. I mean it literally. Every late night, every second mortgage, every Christmas I worked instead of trimmed a tree, I told myself it was so that one day Grant would inherit something that meant he never had to feel as small as I felt at 22 years old, divorced, broke, and told by a bank loan officer that a woman running machinery was too much of a risk to finance. I proved him wrong for 30 years. I built something worth proving him wrong about: $18 million in annual revenue, 61 employees, contracts with 3 aerospace suppliers who'd never once, in 15 years, had to ask me twice to fix a defect. People look at a woman my age in a blazer at a manufacturing company and they assume I'm the founder's widow, coming in for a tour. They don't assume I built the place with a scar on my hand and a business card from a library printer. My daughter-in-law Whitney looked at me and assumed something else entirely. She assumed I was finished. Let me tell you how she got that idea, and how spectacularly wrong she was. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, where women who were underestimated finally get the last quiet word. If you've ever built something with your own 2 hands only to watch someone try to walk in and take the credit, type "I built it" in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Grant is my only child. His father left when Grant was 6, and it was just the 2 of us in a rented duplex with a space heater we ran sparingly and a car that started on the 3rd try if you were patient with it. I cleaned offices at night for 2 years before I saved enough to buy that first lathe. Grant did his homework on a folding table in the corner of the shop while I worked the floor, and some nights he fell asleep right there, on a stack of moving blankets, with the smell of machine oil in his hair. I never wanted him to remember it that way. I wanted him to remember arriving at a company that was already built, already humming, already his for the taking. By the time Grant turned 30, Voss Precision Fabricators was doing $11 million a year, and I brought him in as operations manager. He was good at it, genuinely good, better with people than I ever was, better at reading a room, better at the parts of running a business that have nothing to do with a lathe. I was proud in the quiet way you're proud of something you were terrified you'd fail at. Then, 4 years ago, Grant married Whitney. Whitney came from money, the kind of family that had a boat and referred to it as the boat, like there was only ever one boat worth discussing. She had an MBA from a program with a name that made people nod slowly, and she'd spent 6 years in corporate consulting before Grant brought her home to meet me over a pot roast I'd spent all day on. She looked around my dining room, the same dining room I'd had since 1998, and said, "This is charming. So authentic." I have learned, over 71 years, that when a woman calls your dining room authentic, she is telling you, as clearly as she is able, that she has already decided what she thinks of you. To Whitney, I was the founder in the folksy sense of the word. A nice origin story to put in the company's marketing materials. A woman who'd done something admirable back when admirable things were simpler, and who should now, gracefully, get out of the way of people who understood what she called modern operations. She never asked me a single question about how I read a balance sheet. She never asked what I'd learned closing a 15-year defense contract on a handshake and a promise I kept even when it cost me money. She decided, in the first 90 seconds of that pot roast dinner, that whatever I knew, I'd learned it by accident, and whatever she knew, she'd learned it properly. 2 years ago, Grant brought her into the company as director of operations. I welcomed it. I told myself new eyes could be good for the place. I told myself I was tired, that I deserved to hand pieces of this off, that this was what building something for your family was supposed to look like, watching the next generation carry it forward. I did not yet understand that Whitney did not see herself as the next generation. She saw herself as the correct one. Here's the first small sign, the kind you only recognize in hindsight for what it was. 6 months after she started, Whitney redid the org chart for a client presentation. My name, Eleanor Voss, founder, was listed at the very bottom, in a box labeled Legacy Advisory, a box that, as far as I could tell, connected to nothing. I asked Grant about it over the phone. "Mom, it's just a chart." "It's not, don't read into it." I let it go. I have run a company for 30 years, and I have learned when to hold a line and when a line isn't worth the cost of holding it yet. This one, I decided, wasn't worth it yet. I was wrong about that, too. But I'll get there. Over the following year, the small things accumulated the way sawdust accumulates on a shop floor. You don't notice it building until you're ankle deep and someone asks why you didn't sweep sooner. Whitney began scheduling meetings during the 2 afternoons a week I still came into the office, and somehow the meetings kept landing during the exact hour I was usually there. She started referring to the company, in emails I was copied on but never addressed in, as where we're taking things, never where you built it. She hired a new head of sales without mentioning it to me until after the offer was signed, and when I asked why, she said, "I didn't want to bother you with the operational stuff anymore, Eleanor. You've earned a break. You've earned a break." I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment, because I sat with it for a long time. It's a lovely, generous-sounding sentence. It is also, when a person says it to you about the thing you built with your own hands, one of the most quietly devastating sentences in the English language. It means, I've decided you're finished, and I've decided it would be rude of me to ask your opinion about that. I let it slide longer than I should have, and I'll tell you honestly why. Grant loved her. Grant was happy. And some very old, very tired part of me, the part that remembers a space heater and a folding table, did not want to be the mother-in-law who made things difficult. I had spent my whole life being underestimated by men in bank offices. I did not want to become, in my own family, the thing everyone quietly managed around. But there was one thing about me that Whitney never bothered to check, and it's the thing this whole story turns on, so I want you to remember it. When I brought Grant into the company as a partner, I restructured the ownership. Grant received 46% of Voss Precision Fabricators in shares, vesting over 10 years, structured by my longtime corporate attorney, a sharp, careful woman named Renata Cole who has kept my paperwork airtight for over 2 decades. I kept 54% for myself. Not because I didn't trust my son. Because I didn't yet know his wife, and because 30 years of running a business had taught me one unbreakable rule: never, under any circumstances, hand over the majority of anything you built until you are certain, past any reasonable doubt, of the character of the people receiving it. Whitney never asked about the ownership structure. Not once, in 2 years. She assumed, I can only imagine, based on the confidence with which she later acted, that once Grant was running things, the company was functionally his, and that I was a kind of ceremonial founder, a nice plaque on the wall, present at meetings the way a portrait is present in a hallway. She was about to learn, in front of 61 employees and a catered lunch, exactly how wrong that assumption was. If you've ever built something with your own hands only to watch someone assume they inherited the credit along with the paycheck, you already know where this is going. Comment below if you've lived this. I want to hear it. The trouble accelerated 3 months before our annual company meeting, which we hold every October in the warehouse floor itself, tables set up between the machines, because I have always believed the people who make the parts should eat lunch in the room where the parts get made, not in some rented ballroom downtown. I started hearing things. Small things, at first, the way you hear a machine start to run rough before you can name what's wrong with it. Our longtime plant supervisor, a steady, careful man named Marcus Webb who has worked for me for 22 years, mentioned in passing that Whitney had asked him to compile a full report on legacy inefficiencies, a phrase, he told me, that seemed to mean anything I had personally implemented more than 5 years ago. Our bookkeeper, Donna, who has done our books since I could barely afford to pay her, mentioned that Whitney had requested access to accounts she'd never asked about before, payroll history, my personal compensation going back a decade, and, strangely, a full breakdown of who held voting authority on major company decisions. That last one caught my attention the way a burr catches on fabric. Small, but it snags. I called Renata Cole, my attorney, and asked her, casually, whether anyone had recently requested copies of our shareholder documentation. Funny you ask, Renata said. Whitney's assistant called my office last month asking for a general overview of the company's ownership structure for an internal presentation. I told her that information isn't something I release without your direct authorization, Eleanor. She didn't call back. I sat with that for a long moment. Whitney had gone looking for the ownership structure and been turned away at the door. I want to tell you I panicked. I didn't. What I felt was something quieter and colder. The feeling of a woman who has just realized the machine 2 rooms away is running rougher than anyone told her, and it is time, finally, to go look at it herself. I asked Renata to pull together the full, current shareholder record, clean, notarized, dated, and I asked her to have it ready within the week, no explanation given, filed the way she files everything, in a slim navy folder with my name typed on the tab. I didn't tell Grant. I didn't tell Whitney. I have learned, in 30 years of business, that when you suspect someone is quietly rewriting a story about you, the worst thing you can do is announce that you've noticed. You simply make sure that when the true version of the story is needed, it is sitting exactly where you can reach it. 2 weeks later, my grandson's ex-nanny, a young woman named Priya who'd left our family's employ the previous spring on good terms and had gone to work as an executive assistant across town, called me out of the blue. She said she felt strange calling. She said she almost didn't. Then she told me that her new employer, a marketing consultant, had been retained by Whitney to design what the consultant's invoice literally called a leadership transition rollout, complete with a press release draft, an internal employee memo, and a slide deck. Eleanor, Priya said, her voice careful, the way you speak when you're about to hand someone something heavy. I only saw the title slide on her monitor for a second before she closed it. It said Voss Precision Fabricators, a new chapter. And underneath it, it said Founder Transition, October Company Meeting. There it was. Not a rumor. Not a feeling. A slide with a date on it. I thanked her. I told her she'd done nothing wrong by telling me, and I meant it. The sick feeling in my stomach was not for her. It was for what she'd just confirmed. My daughter-in-law was planning to announce my removal from my own company, at my own annual meeting, in front of everyone who had ever worked a single shift for me. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the same table where I used to help Grant with his homework, and I did what I have always done when the ground shifts under me. I got out a legal pad, and I made a list. What did I actually know? What could I prove? What would I need in that room, on that day, to make sure the truth was the last thing spoken, not the first thing buried? Second reminder, because this is the part that matters most, if you've ever watched someone plan your exit from something you built while smiling at you across a dinner table, you know exactly the coldness I'm describing. Type I see it below. I want you to know you're not the only one who's lived it. I called Renata Cole the next morning and told her everything, Priya's phone call, the slide title, the mysterious request for our ownership documents. Renata is not an emotional woman, which is precisely why I trust her with everything that matters. She was quiet for a moment on the phone, and then she said, "Eleanor, I want you to understand something clearly. Whitney can stand up at that meeting and say whatever she likes about restructuring, about roles, about the future of the company. She has no legal authority to remove you from anything. She's not on the board. She holds no shares. The only two people with voting authority over Boss Precision Fabricators are you and Grant, and you hold the majority." "I know that," I said. "I don't think she does." Then, Renata said, "I think it's time she found out. In the right way, at the right moment, with the paperwork already in the room." We spent the next 10 days preparing quietly. Renata drafted, at my request, a single formal document, a corporate resolution confirming current share ownership and current officer appointments, signed and notarized, dated that week. Nothing dramatic. Nothing accusatory. Just the truth, printed, stamped, and ready. I asked Marcus Webb, my plant supervisor, to have the company's actual, physical stock ledger, the bound one, the one that's lived in the company safe since the year I incorporated, brought up from storage and placed, unremarked upon, in the credenza of the conference room where we hold the annual meeting. And I asked Donna, my bookkeeper of 22 years, one simple question. If someone in this company tried to authorize a payment, a hire, or a personnel change above a certain threshold, who actually has to sign off on it, according to our bylaws? Donna didn't even have to check. You do, Eleanor. Anything over 50,000, or any officer-level personnel action, requires either your signature or a majority board vote. Whitney's not on the board. Grant is, but he can't unilaterally act either. It's always required both of your signatures, or yours alone, since the founding. I asked her to have that page of the bylaws, just that one page, printed and ready, in case anyone in that room needed reminding of what the paper actually said, rather than what they'd assumed it said. I want to be honest with you about something. In the final days before that meeting, I doubted myself. I sat up one night at 11:30 with my phone in my hand, seriously considering calling Grant and asking him directly, "Is your wife planning to fire me from my own company at Friday's meeting?" Some tired, hopeful part of me wanted him to say, "Mom, that's insane, of course not," and for the whole ugly shape of it to dissolve into a misunderstanding. But another part of me, the part that had run a business for 30 years, knew that if I called and warned them, I would never actually learn what Whitney intended to do when she believed no one was watching closely enough to stop her. I put the phone down. I let Friday come. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not for style, for clarity. My navy blazer, the one I've worn to every important negotiation for 15 years. My reading glasses in my breast pocket, not my purse, where I could reach them in one motion. And in my bag, a slim manila folder of my own, Renata's notarized resolution, the bylaws page, and a printed copy of the shareholder ledger, current as of that Tuesday. I did not bring it to threaten anyone. I brought it because 30 years in business had taught me the same lesson over and over: the moment you need the truth, is never the moment you have time to go find it. Now here's the part one know you've been waiting for. The warehouse floor was set up the way it always is for our October meeting, long folding tables between the CNC machines, white tablecloths that always look slightly out of place against the concrete floor, a catering spread from the same barbecue place we've used for a decade. 61 employees, some who'd been with me since the muffler shop days, some hired last spring, all finding seats, all a little looser than usual, the way people are when there's food and the machines are quiet for once. Grant sat at the head table beside Whitney. I sat 2 seats down, in my usual chair, the one I've sat in every October for 30 years. Whitney stood to open the meeting. She looked polished, rehearsed, the way you look when you have practiced something in a mirror. She thanked everyone for their hard work. She talked about a year of growth and evolution. And then, exactly the way the slide title had promised, she said the words. As part of our continued growth, we're announcing some leadership changes today. Effective immediately, Eleanor Voss will be transitioning out of her operational role. We want to honor everything she built, a small, practiced pause here, the kind that's meant to look like emotion, and we're incredibly grateful. But it's time for Voss Precision Fabricators to step fully into its next chapter. A man from HR, someone Whitney had hired 8 months earlier, someone I had met exactly twice, slid a manila folder across the table toward me. Severance terms. A number circled in blue pen, as though it were generous. As though it were a gift. The room did that uncomfortable half-clap people do when they're not sure whether they're supposed to be sad or celebratory, when the person leading the meeting has decided for them which one to perform. I did not reach for the folder. I let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I did not raise my voice, because I have never once needed to raise my voice to be heard in a room I built. Whitney, I said, before we adjourn, I have one question. Who authorized the printing of new share certificates for this transition? She blinked. I'm sorry? A change in operational leadership of a private corporation, I said, requires either board approval or majority shareholder authorization, depending on what exactly you're announcing. So I'd like to know, was this authorized by the board or by the majority shareholder? Eleanor, this doesn't need to be complicated. We just felt it was time. I'm not asking how you felt, I said gently. I'm asking who signed off on it. I reached into my bag and set the manila folder on the table, my folder, not the HR one. I opened it and laid 3 documents flat, one at a time, the way you lay cards on a table when the hand is already over. The current shareholder ledger, notarized, dated that Tuesday. 54%, Eleanor Voss. 46%, Grant Voss. 0%, Whitney Voss. The bylaws page, the one Donna had pulled, the clause circled in the same blue pen the HR folder had used to circle my severance number, which I confess gave me a small private satisfaction. And Renata's resolution, confirming, in language a room full of people could read for themselves without me needing to explain a single word of it, that I remained founder, majority owner, and sitting officer of Voss Precision Fabricators, and that no personnel action above the threshold defined in our bylaws could be authorized without either my signature or a full board vote. I don't recall, I said, still gently, authorizing anything. Grant, did you? Grant's face had gone the particular shade of pale I remembered from when he was 9 years old and had broken something he didn't know how to confess to. He looked at the ledger. He looked at his wife. Whitney, he said quietly, you told me this was already approved. I assumed, Whitney started, and then stopped, because there is no graceful end to that sentence in a room full of witnesses. I let the silence do the rest of the work. I have learned that silence, held steadily, says more than any accusation ever could. I built this company from a rented unit behind a muffler shop, I said, to the room now, not just to her. I signed every early loan personally, with my own name, when the bank wouldn't accept my husband's because there wasn't one. I have sat in this exact seat for 30 Octobers. I am not opposed to change. I have made more changes to this company than anyone in this room will ever know about. But change requires authority, and authority, as it happens, requires ownership. And the ownership of this company has not changed in 30 years. Marcus Webb, from the back of the room, said quietly but clearly, the ledger's in the safe if anyone wants to see the original. I hadn't asked him to say it. He said it because 22 years of watching me build this place had earned him the right to say it, and he used that right exactly when it mattered. This is the moment I want you to remember, because it's not the moment of anger, it's the moment of clarity. Facts, laid flat, one at a time, said quietly, do more damage to a false story than any amount of shouting ever could. Whitney sat down. She didn't have another line prepared, because she had never planned for a version of this meeting in which anyone in the room asked her to show her authority rather than simply accept her announcement. I did not fire her on the spot. I want to be honest about that, because I know some of you watching would have wanted me to. I have never believed that humiliation, however earned, builds anything worth having. I said. Instead, we'll finish this conversation properly, in my office, on Monday. Today, we eat lunch, because 60 of the people in this room had nothing to do with this, and they've earned their barbecue. The meeting closed. People ate. A few of them came by my table quietly over the next hour, not to make a scene, just to rest a hand briefly on my shoulder on their way past, the kind of gesture that says we saw that, and we're glad you were ready. Monday came. I sat down with Grant and Whitney in my office, my actual office, the one with the same metal desk I bought secondhand in year 3, still there, because I have never seen the point in replacing something that still works. I need you both to understand something, I said. I am not angry that Grant runs operations. I am not angry that this company will one day be entirely his, and I have already begun the paperwork to accelerate that transition on my own timeline, because I trust my son. What I will not tolerate, from anyone, in any company I have ever built, is being told what my role is by someone who never once asked what my role actually was. Whitney, to her credit, did not try to argue the ledger. There was nothing left to argue. What she said instead surprised me. I didn't think you'd ever really let go, she said, and for the first time in 2 years, her voice didn't sound rehearsed. I thought if I didn't force it, it would just stay yours forever. And I wanted something here to be mine. It was, I'll admit, the first honest thing she'd ever said to me. You could have asked, I said. In 4 years, you never once asked me what I was planning to do with this company. You only ever told me what you'd already decided. We talked for a long time that Monday. I won't pretend it resolved into something warm and easy, because it didn't, not right away. Whitney remained director of operations, but her role was formally clarified in writing, by Renata, notarized, no room left for assumption, and any personnel or leadership decision above a defined threshold now requires my signature or board approval, in writing, before it is ever announced to a single employee. Grant apologized to me privately, several times, in the weeks that followed. Not for Whitney's plan, he told me, and I believed him, that he genuinely hadn't known the full shape of what she intended until the paper folder hit the table. He apologized for something smaller and, in its way, more important, for letting 2 years of small moments, the org chart, the scheduling, the "you've earned a break," pass without ever once asking me directly how they made me feel. I didn't want to make things difficult between you two, he told me. I know, I said. But Grant, some things are supposed to be difficult before they can be honest. 6 months later, Whitney asked to sit in on one of my old planning meetings, the kind where I still walk the floor with Marcus and talk through next year's equipment needs, not to run it, just to watch. She didn't say much. At the end, she asked me one question, the first real question she'd ever asked me about the business. How did you know, back at the beginning, which risks were worth taking? I told her the truth. I didn't. I just made sure that whatever happened, I'd always kept enough of what mattered in my own name that no one else's mistake could cost me everything. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when you're finally hearing something you should have asked for years ago. Now, here's where things stand today. The company had its best fiscal year in its history this past spring. Grant runs day-to-day operations, and he runs them well, I've never doubted that part. Whitney has become, genuinely, a sharper operator than she was 2 years ago, and I like to think some small part of that came from finally understanding that authority isn't inherited by marriage, or by title, or by a slide deck with a confident font. It's earned, and it's documented, and it's protected, quietly, carefully, long before anyone ever tries to take it from you. I still come in 2 afternoons a week. Nobody schedules around me anymore. My chair is still mine at the October meeting, and this year, when the meeting opened, Grant stood up first and said, before anything else, "Thank you to my mother, who built the place we're all standing in." I didn't need him to say it. But I won't pretend it didn't feel good to hear. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this: love your family. Give them everything you can, work yourself raw for their sake if that's what it takes, the way I did for 30 years. But never, under any circumstances, hand over the majority of what you built simply because someone assumes, out loud and with great confidence, that it's already theirs. Being underestimated is not the same as being powerless. Sometimes it's simply the quiet place you stand while you wait for the moment someone finally asks the one question they should have asked from the very beginning. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this story reminded you of your own, of a moment someone assumed they'd already won, before checking whether you'd actually let go, tell me about it in the comments. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Alpha Mom Stories, because the women who built things quietly always, eventually, get the last word.